Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. We really appreciate EPL putting on this, like hosting us for tonight and for recording and putting it up on YouTube. First, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route of the Nehiwa, Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Nakota Isiga, Nakota Sioux, and Nitsipati Blackfoot peoples. We acknowledge many or all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have called this land home since time immemorial. This is a land where stories have been told and shared for centuries, and we are grateful to the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are able to share these stories. I am Cassandra, she, her, and I am one of the municipal liaisons for National Novel Writing Month here in Edmonton. This is our first event this year, and if you're joining us for more, we will have in-person events and also virtual events. If you're not familiar with National Novel Writing Month is, it's an annual challenge to write 50,000 words towards a novel in 30 days. It's a lot. 1667 is your guiding light. That is the number that you live by, and it's a lot of fun. If you are doing the challenge, we do hope you will come out to our write-ins. We find that people do much better if they come out, and that's not just me being biased. I think a lot of people I recognize quite a few names today can attest to the value of write-ins. I am so pleased to be joined by these three fabulous people today for our plot planning panel. So for anybody who likes to plan or is thinking about actually planning this year, hi, then they are going to share with us a lot of wisdom about how they plot and plan and how they continue on. I am joined by Nikki Vogel, who has had poetry and short stories published in both print and electronic format. She was a runner-up in the 2012 Little Bird Writing Contest, and in 2015 had a story listed as a notable science fiction in the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy. Her first book publication, Silencing Rebecca, was a finalist for the Diamond Foundation Prize for Children/Youth. I am also pleased to be joined by Patrick Weeks, who is a senior writer at BioWare and has contributed to all three of the award-winning Mass Effect games. Their stories have appeared in Amazing Stories, Realms of Fantasy, and Strange Horizons. They are the author of the Rogues of the Republic trilogy, Dragon Age: The Mass Empire, a novel set in the Dragon Age universe, and Feeder. And then last but not least is the Edmonton Public Library Writer-In-Residence, Kate Boorman. Her books have been published in 4 world territories and have appeared on a variety of best of lists, from Cosmopolitan to O, the Oprah magazine. The first book in her acclaimed Winterkill trilogy won the Alberta Writers Guild Award for Children's Fiction, and her newest thriller, Into the Sublime, was a YALSA 2023 Best Books. Her 6th novel, The Heathens and the Dragon, released this fall, and if I'm not mistaken, there is a book launch on Saturday. Double book launch on Saturday for that.
Yes,
at Audrey's
on
Books.
the 14th. On the 14th.
Yeah. Or sorry, not yeah. Oh my God, I'm already a week behind. Yeah, on the 14th. So if anybody's interested, it's 2 o'clock, I think, at Audrey's. So yeah, so I just thank you so much for everyone for coming. And we're just going to jump right in. I will leave time for questions at the end. If there is anything that's like super drastic, you can also ping. Jeff Ryan is one of our other MLs, and I volunteered him to also help me highlight questions if there's anything immediate. All right, so first question, what is your overall approach to planning and plotting out a project? And how detailed are your outlines, if at all? I'm going to throw that to Kate because she's just the first person I see. So
Okay, great. So my approach to planning and plotting out a project. Well, those of you who have joined me for my novel writing series in the spring this will sound familiar to. I don't tend to plot within like the nth degree of my novel. I tend to give myself a few goalposts in terms of the narrative structure, and I like to have an idea of what those look like, and then I go from there. And so part of it is that I like to leave a little bit for discovery, like the joy, unfortunately, in this job, not unfortunately, but mostly the joy is in the doing. And so I like to not necessarily box myself into a corner in terms of what the book will be, but I do have a kind of a 6-point skeleton that I aim for, and that involves the opening image, the inciting incident, the midpoint reversal of fortune, the pit of despair. Am I up to 4? And then 4, is that 4? The climax, and then the closing image. So that's kind of my quick and dirty on how I conceptualize my book before I begin.
Awesome. I'm going to go to Patrick next because that's just how my screen works.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this question because it's great to be in a panel and look at the very first question that you've been warned about and go, oh. But I think for me, it is a combination. I do plan, and sometimes that plan is just theft, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. The novel I'm currently planning, it's just, I know what I'm doing. I'm stealing from a movie I like, and I'm just going to do that, but this other thing. And so I just have to follow that. When I actually write stuff down, what I end up doing is I keep trying to come up with a cool term for it. There is no cool term for it. I tried to call it fractal, and then I think someone else had that. So what I do is I do very high level outlines for each kind of act that I'm in. Here are the things I know need to happen in the beginning. Here are the things I know need to happen in the middle. Here are the things that need to happen at the end. And then only once I'm into that act do I kind of go chapter by chapter. Here's what needs to happen. And only once I'm into each chapter do I go scene by scene. Here's what needs to happen. Because what I found is planning for me is actually really useful, but it's really useful in terms of getting me going. It's not actually super useful for me in terms of the end product looking like the thing that I plotted or planned. So I will do a bunch of outlining, and it's really, really useful, but it's just to get me going. And then once the project is started and underway, I will be adjusting things on the fly. So that's why I only outline Act 3 in very, very broad terms until I'm there, because if I get partway through and go, oh, I need a different thing to happen in Act 3 because of this, I'm not trying to rearrange a very complicated like Jenga tower of plot and narrative. I can just go, great, I know I had the thing that said we're going to have the big climactic fight here. It's going to be over here instead. It's going to be different. Cool, future Patrick will figure something out. And then future Patrick gets to it.
Awesome. And how about you, Nikki?
I would say similar to Kate and Patrick, I do outline. I tend to be very detailed in the beginning, and then I get frustrated with outlining because I prefer the writing. It's more fun. But I do have a general idea of what needs going to happen in the middle and where I'm going, like what the end looks like, so that I always have that in my head as I'm heading there. I think since this is a NaNo panel, I'm going to talk about when I plotted for, I did some ghostwriting, and they wanted, 50,000 word novels in 4 weeks. So, and obviously it needs to be a little better than a first draft at that point. So I had to be extremely detailed in the planning phase. Otherwise, I could never have written at that speed, because as we all know, you can say, I am going to sit down and write X amount every day, but life rolls over you, right? One day the dog is sick or something happens and you got to do something else. So that's my story.
Awesome. Patrick kind of touched on this one a little bit, but what do you find is typically the catalyst for a project? Like, is it a character, a scene, a theme that you want to explore, a movie that you want to do different or better? Steal from, borrow judiciously. And how does that kind of different catalyst or spark maybe change or alter how you approach a project? And I'm just going to let anybody jump in at this one.
Shall I?
Go for it.
I find every project seems to have a different catalyst. Sometimes it's the question I'm asking myself, what would happen if? Sometimes it's, I've thought up a magical system that I want to tell a story within. And so now I'm trying to think, okay, well, here's this cool magic idea, but what kind of characters can bring this to life the best way? So I think it depends on each project, honestly.
For me, in a lot of places, what I have found is that for me, it's talking to other people is actually kind of the catalyst and the inciting event. The subheader of my website is absurd premise executed faithfully. And so a lot of times what I've found is it's the idea that I talk about that gets someone listening to me to go, wait, what? And then but it has to be what, and then kind of winning them over. If they just go what, then maybe that's good, or maybe that's just something that's good enough for a short story, but it doesn't have a novel's worth of interest behind it. But if it's something that I can get, like so the novel I'm currently plotting came because I was the world for it was I was brainstorming role-playing game settings, and I thought of the most ridiculous over-the-top role-playing setting I could, which was spoilers. I said, okay, so Dungeons & Dragons has Dark Sun, which was like kind of metal, but what if you went super metal and you had a sun that would like literally kill you? And so I was like, this is the world of the basilisk sun, and if the sun hits you, you turn to stone. And I was talking about it with one of my kids, and he said, Dad, that is the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. How does that, what does even, no, Dad, that's ridiculous. And he leaves the room, and a half hour later he comes back and he goes, Dad, I still have questions. What does it do with their clothes? Does the clothes count? How much of their body has to be in the sun before they turn to stone? I was like, okay, this actually has legs. This is ridiculous enough that I can do something with this. And it started as like a role-playing thing. And I'm like, no, I'm telling stories in this thing. I want a world in the basilisk sun, and just like do my ridiculous post-apocalyptic goofball swords and sorcery, but incredibly queer and probably more kind-hearted than the term swords and sorcery fits. And like everything sort of grew out of that basic weirdness and talking trash with my friends and my kids. So, replicate that if you can.
I do love the idea of just like following your weirdest instinct, right? I mean, I think that there's merit in that. I just told a group of kids that the other day. I was like, don't discard your weird stuff, like follow that. And yeah, it is true that it does vary for each project. I would say for me, sometimes I just am quite enamored with a setting. So for Into the Sublime, I love cave systems. I don't love going there, but that's the beauty of writing fiction. You can go there and you can leave whatever you want. And so I wanted to set like a horror thriller in a cave system. And so part of it was that. It was just, I wanted to explore a story within that setting. Sometimes it's, sort of as Patrick mentioned, a conversation with people. I remember my studio mate saying to me, we were talking about Toddlers and Tiaras, that reality TV show. And this was years ago. And she said, yeah, I keep thinking like when those kids grow up, what are those lawsuits going to look like? And so that just a conversation that I sort of filed away in my brain. And then of course, what we buried is about a child beauty pageant reality TV show star who was suing her parents for emotional damages and legal emancipation. And I mean, that's not the story. The story is the parents disappear and the kids head off into the desert to find them. But, that is, I guess, the catalyst. So sometimes, yeah, it's a conversation with people or a setting that you want to explore, just an idea a question that you're parsing through. I think that for me, the act of writing a book is leaning into questions that I'm really interested in. And I don't need to be posing the answer necessarily. It's just posing those questions and the reader, you know, making up their own minds about things is sort of, it feels like we're having a conversation. So yeah, questions, conversations with people, experiences you have, it's all different depending on the spark. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Now we kind of heard a little bit about the 3-act structure and things like that. Are there any other types of structures or methodologies, such as the 3-act structure or say the CAT that you use, or that you kind of maybe fall back on if you're getting stuck or anything like that?
I think
Go.
I'm.
I'll go. Oh,
Oh, no,
sorry,
go for it.
Patrick.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
We're all being so polite. I had so many times I bought all these writing books, and I don't know, some of them, there were like tiny segments that resonated. And then someone I know, a screenwriter, was raving about John Truby, The Anatomy of Story. And I found that book very helpful.
That was
But
me.
it is,
That was me.
pardon me?
That was me.
Was that you? It
Yeah.
wasn't Michael? Maybe both of you. Maybe I had to hear it from two people in order for
Okay.
it to.
Oh, maybe that's true. Maybe that's true.
Yeah, it takes a lot to get through this thick skull. Come on now. The problem is it's more for screenwriting. So you always run into these areas where you're like, well, how's that going to translate into the book? And more recently, I mean, it had been recommended to me a million times, and then I finally picked it up. Story Genius by Lisa Cron, I find super helpful. Making yourself ask the emotional questions about your characters. And then Save the Cat Writes a Novel, I find just is something, it helps me every single time because it has the kind of genres I'm looking to write. Yeah, there we go. Has the genres I'm looking to, you know, do, and the points you have to hit, or you should think about hitting. Maybe they don't always fall in the same spot, and that's something I think I would always caution you. It's like the books are helpful, but if you try to follow it like a formula, it doesn't always work. So I mean, my novel was, I had written it linear, in a linear storytelling, and Kate read it and she's like, oh, this, you need to bury the lead. And I'm like, oh, okay. So now it's, you know, back and forth in time. So there you go.
Yeah, I'm just really inserting myself here in your process, Nikki. Sorry. I just was so delighted. I remember John Truby resonating with you, and after I had mentioned, like, because I'm sort of reticent sometimes to recommend craft books because they're not for everyone, right? And
right,
you know, I found bits in there that I felt quite helpful, that I thought were quite helpful, and then I remember you being like, yeah, I go back to that, you know, his sort of basic elements of like determining a symbol and determining a, you know, a guiding principle for your, in his case, what he's talking about is film. But yeah, that I find that helpful too. Patrick,
yeah,
do you
I
have
really liked it. Yeah.
Bibles, Patrick?
Honestly, no. I'm really kind of bad at that answer. I will say I sometimes think it will either be 5-act structure or 3-act structure, but I've had a book that shipped with what turned out to be 4-act structure because I wrote with 5-act structure and then realized it was running long, and I just cut the 4th act and went right from 3rd to 5th. And, you know, like a car on the highway, it sputtered a bit, but it got there. And yeah, so what I'm more interested in, I guess, than the specific than doing a specific act structure is writing down key moments or key turning points, or even because of the day job, I often come at it at a much more with a much more mercenary approach, and I'm less about, is this beautiful, is this poetic and true, and more about will the reader understand what is happening and what's probably going to happen next. So I will often go, for information flow, here is what the reader needs to know, because I usually am writing fantasy and science fiction. And because I write fantasy and science fiction, often in secondary worlds. There's a lot of time where I'm hitting the reader with a lot of new concepts, really just ridiculous stuff. Okay, here's how the world works, and here's this alien group, and here's this alien group's culture. Here's this other alien group and their culture. Oh, and here's how space travel works. And here's the secret history of the world based on the aliens that have been in control of different political groups over the years and stuff. Okay, I can't do that all in chapter 1. So I end up having here's this character's arc. This character goes from not caring about anyone, pushing her feelings down, just being a survivalist, to being a dedicated member of the resistance group, fighting against the aliens and stuff. And that I kind of put that on a piece of paper, but then next to it, I have a completely different arc that is, what concepts am I hitting the reader with? So I'm introducing these aliens, this piece of weird technology that the reader's going to have to think about and put a good picture of in their head, this new piece of stuff, this new weird historical event, so that I'm not overloading people. And I would say that's less a brilliant decision or discovery on my part and more learned through my failures, because where my novels clunk, even the ones that have gotten published, the feedback has been, wow, this is good. Patrick hits you with a lot of ideas, kind of all at once. But if you can understand it, it's really good. I'm like, okay, that sounds like it's something I should work on. So for me, that's my, just trying to get better at incorporating things and making it easier for people to pick up my books.
That's awesome. And you've also just given me a perfect segue. So you've kind of touched on this a lot, but what is your approach to world building then? Like how much detail do you plan out beforehand? Do you kind of discover as you go along? We can throw it back to Patrick, or if you've already spoken enough, you can pass it on.
I can talk. I am a hack. So my world building is going to be simple as much as possible. It's until I get weirdly neurodiversely excited about something, at which point I then outline it in a Google Doc no one but me ever sees far more deeply than it ever needs to be outlined. So I will go, it's a simple world. These things just work like this. It's simple. Don't think about it. Anyways, I couldn't sleep one night, so I wrote the entire alien lexicon and how their language is put together so that whenever I need to do something in the future, I can just go to that page. So I've really saved myself time in the long run by not sleeping that one night. So for me, it's at a high level, it's really just what I need at any given moment. I can't remember who said it, but it was, I build the world far enough to see the hills in the distance, but I don't need to know what's over the hills until the characters get there. I don't know. Again, it's going to be much different for everybody, though. Other people like coherent worlds that make sense.
I think that does make a good amount of sense, because it sounds to me what you're talking about is doing like a crazy amount of world building for yourself so that you know how the characters can operate and what is available to them to solve the story problem. That doesn't always make it onto the page, right? And in fact, there's much world building that does not make it onto the page. There's lots and lots of backstory. I think that world building for me is that exact thing of what tools are available to my characters to solve their problem. And so if you have a magic system, you will need to know that they can't just magic their way. Like, why didn't we just go to the end immediately? How does that work? Or if you have them stuck in a remote location, what does that world look like so that they can't just radio for help and get off the mountain, whatever that is. But I think that it's important to keep in mind that world building serves the story, not the other way around. I think that the reader can tell when, we're just so pleased with our world building and we went, full hog on it for I don't know how many weeks, and we wrote all this stuff for ourselves, and now you have to listen to it, right? Like, I did all of this research about this particular kind of jet engine, and even though my character is in like desperate peril, we're going to pause and you're going to get 2 paragraphs of this jet because I did that research. So oftentimes I would say that the world building is for me, and like a glimmer of it comes through, but it also saturates everything as well, because it's It's giving us the possibilities for our characters. I don't know, does that resonate with you, Nikki? Or
I think there's a huge amount of stuff you tell yourself that never sees the page. And the one thing I have learned over time, I have a critique partner who's merciless. And if I put any piece of information in at a point when nobody really needs to know it, she's just like, why here? She's like, it's like, I don't need to know this right now. You save it for later when we need to know. And I'm like, but I want to know, I want to tell people, it's so cool. I thought of this thing. So yeah, I think, and I also think, well, I end up writing multiple drafts. I'm sure it's not very efficient way of storytelling, but each time I do that, I know my world better and better and better, and my characters better, and things become very organic then. So
that's actually something that I've benefited from, is knowing that my first draft is allowed to be clunky and placeholder in places. On one that I was working on, I got into the novel a fairly significant distance and then realized I don't know actually how the military structure works in this fantasy world. I had someone who was a general, and then I had someone else who was an air commander, because they were crystal floaty ships. And I was like, okay, all I know is that this nation wears green and this nation wears blue, and that's what I had. And so I basically went, okay, I'm just going to keep going, because I don't want to stop and look up military uniforms and grades and ranks right now. But, note to self, as part of the next draft, be ready to do a pass where you fix what all the characters in both militaries are wearing. And I did, and the world didn't end. And, now it's like, great, 2 different shades of green, and then here's their formal uniforms and their informal uniforms. And, and then there was an additional pass to take out the overdoing it that I did when I put all of the uniforms in the second draft. But
the thread count.
yeah, it got there eventually. And, what was, for me, it was enough to like, okay, the first draft often tells me what I need to research more to figure out what the second draft will be, or to get through a good second draft and have that be solid. So I don't know, maybe that's just my argument for not doing enough research beforehand. I did research on other stuff that
But don't you find you don't know what you need to research? No. I don't ever. I do the same as you. I'll write until I get to a point where I'm like, oi, I don't know what I need to know to do this. And so I just move past it, knowing that later I'll have to go back and figure that out because it's missing. There's information missing.
Yeah. And most of the time, again, there are times when I have to actually pause and look something up because the story literally doesn't work without knowing that sort of information. And, part of writing is knowing when you actually have to stop and do the research. But again, the uniforms, unless my story was about tailors or fashion designers, what people were wearing was set dressing. So I could go, yeah, good, I will fix this in the next draft and the world won't end.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was listening to a live stream that Patrick Rothfuss did with Tad Williams and Nnedi Okorafor talking about world building. And they also kind of had the, you get down what you need to get down, but they all had a little bit of a thing. So for Patrick Rothfuss, it's the economy. He needs to know what the economy is of his world. And I'm like just thinking, like listening to Patrick, I'm like, it sounds like the military was something that was like very key, at least in that world. Maybe not every world you develop, but yeah, kind of like that.
I really like that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was really interested in the discussion and just listening to like, yeah, no, you don't need the world Bibles, but you need to know what your kind of your personal hangups are. I think, Tolkien loved linguistics, so he became a writer, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all about what's at a higher level. I feel like, again, the world building is, you should know what the point of the that's putting too much of a that's putting it too finely. You should know what the hook of your story is to some extent, or you should know what you believe in strongly enough that you think people are going to want to read this book for. Like, I know my world building often gets to adequate, and my settings often get to aspirationally adequate. I will never be the person describing the clothing very well. I can get to okay, but it's only ever going to be okay. But I can make dialogue pop. I can write fight scenes, and because I like that, that's my fun stuff. One of my friends said I could tell you choreograph this in your basement, and it was for a novel that got published and people liked. So I was like, yeah, I love writing fight scenes, and I can make characters talk in ways that sound fun. And for me, that's the hook. So that's the part I have to know beforehand. I don't need to build the world as much. I do have to know how all of my characters talk. That is an important part of the plotting for me, is doing weird exercises like, here's this character. Here are my 4 core people. They're walking into a house and a monster jumps out of the closet. What does each person say? And they all have to be 4 different things. Because if 2 of them say the same thing, I'm treading too close to the kind of archetypes together. And so I have to make sure that I've got those differently, because for me, that's an important part of putting it together in my head.
Awesome. You're just like leading perfectly into my questions. So my next question was actually going to be, what do you know? What do you do to get to know your characters? Apparently throw them in front of a monster is one.
I think that I write the book, unfortunately, but take heart, everyone. The book is written in revision anyway, so say I do have to sort of get a draft out, I think, before I really understand my characters. I will say that I am not the type of writer who has notebooks full of, their favorite color and what their dog's name was when they were a child, and, what their aunts and all of these. I don't tend to do that. For me, it's most important for me to understand what they're after in the story and what their function is in the story that I'm trying to tell. So for my main character, what do they want? Why can't they just go get it? What is their sort of fundamental misbelief? And what do they need? And that is related to the misbelief. And then other characters in your story also have a function, right? They're not just there because it's cool and that you need people because people exist. They have a function within the story, the narrative arc, and the journey that you're telling. And so understanding the same things for them, what they want versus what they need, their flaw, all of that sort of thing. So I get pictures of characters in my head, certainly, but this is not neither here nor there. It's just the way that I am, that I don't tend to do a deep dive into like I don't even know their birthdays most of the time, right? Like I don't know these things about my characters. I mean, I could make it up, but unless it's pertinent to the story, like I know everything about them in terms of what journey they're on, but if it's sort of incidental, if it's a thing like, oh, they have a birthmark behind their left knee, those are not things that I necessarily have in my head. How about you two?
I'm with you, Kate. Those character worksheets that, I mean, I've seen them touted at various writing things, and I have tried so hard to get into that, and I just can't. I'm like, ugh, who cares? I need to know all the things you say. What do they want? Why can't they get it? What is the foundation of the misbelief? And those things, and then I can go from there. And then I find I can't plan too much because I want my characters to still surprise me along the way. I want them to do something in a scene where I'm like, wow, I didn't expect that. I didn't go into this scene thinking she would do this or do that. So
yeah, I think that's sort of what I mean when I say I write the book, and then because
yeah,
you sort of get to know, like, you can have an idea in your head of what they're after, but then, you know, depending on the situation that they're in, how they're going to
How
react.
that plays out and
Right.
what other characters are with them. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
And yeah, I can't plan that far ahead. I'm like you. I need to write a draft, at least one, if not 10, before I really know for sure.
Mhm.
I think I'm pretty similar because I don't do a super deep dive. Although again, for me the exercises are part of the fun. Not a ton of exercises. I like, again, it's not the birthdays or the trivia, but it's the but I think I asked similar questions, although coming maybe they're almost the same, but they come from a slightly different direction. Again, this might have just been like what book I read when I was first learning to write stuff, but it's like, what is this character most afraid of? And then how is the novel going to drag them through that sideways and make them deal with it? And, you know, because that for me is useful, but also, and I cannot stress this enough, especially for people preparing NaNo, again, steal. Because in your first draft, there is no problem with saying, okay, what I want is a car mechanic by day, cat burglar by night, who talks like the 10th Doctor. Because you know who I can do a good impersonation of when I'm writing? The 10th Doctor from Doctor Who. Great. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. It's going to do this, but the 10th Doctor. Oh, and it's going to look different. Oh, it's going to be a girl. It's going to be a woman of color. Okay, cool. And that's, for me, a lot of times that gets me close to us. That gets me a good starting point. That's not what the character eventually is. You're not going to look at this and go, Patrick was clearly just trying to write the 10th Doctor and did this. But that gets me through the first draft and gets me going, okay, I know close enough what this person says, until I'm like, oh, here they are. Now they've I sometimes find it I get annoyed when other writers say, and then the characters tell me about themselves, because that makes it sound like they don't actually exist in my head. But they do. Something I'm writing surprises me and I realize, oh, this would be a place. Oh, now the character has done something that isn't just the 10th Doctor with a reskin. This is actually where the character is coming from. And by the end of the book, I have enough of those that I can go in and I can make what's really there and I can polish it and hone it like you do in all of your next drafts. But the first draft, unless the character is the point of the story all by itself, unless you're saying I'm writing this novel as a deep dive specifically of this character, if you're not inspired by something, then steal something that you like and run with that as your novel. Because if like the TV show you watch and the character you like on that show, you know how that character acts. So start from that, turn it 90 degrees, put your own twist on it. And that can often get you enough of the way so that you aren't blocked by the blank page.
Patrick, we're not calling it stealing. There's a comment in the chat. It's getting inspired. I think Tim.
Inspired. I am often inspired by, yes, my I said, so the one with the basilisk sun and the post-apocalyptic world and stuff. I'm telling I just want to do kind of like a rom-com in my post-apocalyptic world, because God forbid I write anything that might sell. And so my sales pitch to myself was Some Kind of Wonderful meets Thundar the Barbarian. And I'm, it's what I want to write right now. It's road trip through post-apocalyptic wasteland and thinking you're falling in love with one person, actually falling in love with the other person, hijinks ensue, also probably some robot monsters. Because again, I've started from theft and eventually it will be something heartbreaking and poignant and personal. I'm sorry, inspiration.
Oh, that's amazing. Patrick kind of mentioned again, you just, the blank page, right? So what do you do when you get to a point where your plot isn't working or you've written yourself into a corner? Or does that happen? Maybe you're just all magical geniuses and that just never happens to you.
just I am merciless about throwing stuff away. I have no trouble literally cutting the novel in half and starting again. I was writing Silencing Rebecca, and I'd gotten to about 40,000 words, and I don't know, I was at the spot I wasn't entirely sure what would happen. And the next thing you know, I'm writing a police procedural. And I'm talking to my friend who's a police officer. I'm like, so what would happen in this? And I'm like 20,000 words into this. And I'm like, oh, this is not the right story. What happened here? Cut. It's fine. It's just words. There's more of them. I've got a few.
You have lots. I
Lots.
think, yeah, you have lots. And I think in the case of NaNo, sometimes we panic, right? Because we're already, 25,000 words into this thing and it doesn't seem to be working. But I think it's also okay to just keep going. So Winterkill, my first novel that was published, is a NaNo novel. And it was 2 different books when I was done NaNo. Like I started one place and was like, oh, I think this is how it, and it's like 2 different worlds practically just like mashed together. So that's not great, but you have it to fix. It's there. And so, and you surprise yourself, because sometimes even if things aren't quite working and then you write these other scenes, and even if you have 2 books mashed together, there are kernels from each of those that will help you sort of shape the book that you meant to write the first time. And I think we should all free ourselves from the tyranny of trying to write the book the first time. It's okay. You can't fix what you don't have. And so I think just giving yourself permission to write something that might not be exactly how you envisioned it is really important. It is particularly with the National Novel Writing Month, because as we all know, if you don't win it, they take away your birthday. And then you get no birthdays for the rest of your life, no cake. So
No pressure.
yeah.
Have a good October, everybody.
Good night.
Okay, so for me, it depends for me on for me, there are 2 types of problems. When I'm running into something and I'm having a problem. And I don't have a good metaphor. The metaphor will come to me shortly after I finish talking. But if the problem is where the characters are in the process of where their destination is, that's a big problem, and I need to fix that. And honestly, my super helpful answer is I suggest you develop neurodiversity and try hyper focusing on it if possible, because a couple of nights not sleeping well and spinning your wheels on that one, and you will be actually relieved to finally get to start writing on it when it comes time. But as Nikki and Kate said, I think you have to be prepared to give stuff up. You have to be prepared to cut and change direction, but also that more often, for me, about, I don't know, 90% of the time, the problem is not the destination they're going to. The problem is how they're getting there. That's the thing I find most problems are how they get their problems. And when it's a how they get their problem, I know for a fact that in my next draft, I can fix how they get there. We went there on horseback. Wait a minute, none of my people have an equestrian background. And I just said this other person hates and is allergic to all mammals, which is a problem, for the second draft as well. Okay, I can probably change that to them being on scooters in the next draft. That's not going to break anything. If all I have to change is how they get there. If where they're going is a problem, then I have to change whatever happens at that place, and that's bigger, and maybe I have to think about that and be prepared to do some changes. But most of the problems I run into can be solved by the writing advice I got from a writing teacher back at university, who said, if you can't make it good, make it short. So if the problem is, wow, I have these people on horseback and it turns out I don't know anything about horses, I'm actually coming up with reasons that them riding horses to this area is going to be a problem, because how are they feeding them? Where do the horses go afterward? Do I hate the characters because they've left the horses here and I'm worried bad things are happening to the horses? But I can't yet change them to just being on scooters. I don't want to go back. I don't want to lose my momentum. Just make that part short. You know it's work you're eventually going to throw out and replace with something better. So do the bare minimum you need to do to get past the part where they were on horses, maybe someday scooters or motorcycles or skateboards, and get them to the drug den or the discotheque or the cyberpunk factory where they were supposed to be going. Just get them to the part that you do know next, because you can fix that interstitial bit later.
Awesome. Pro nano tip though, if you do cut, just turn the text white. You won't see it. It leaves a gap in your page. The words still count though, and that's how you get better when you get more words. Don't delete. Just hide, turn it white, or throw it into another document and then count those words when you count your total words. So I have done that many times.
There's still words you wrote.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, you wrote them.
We won't talk about the year that I counted essays I wrote for university just so we could beat Montreal, but I think I saw at least one former ML in here who might actually know that too. All right. How do you keep momentum when you're feeling stuck, when you're kind of in those moments where you're drudging through and you're like, I need to keep it short, but even still, that is a pain.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how do we keep momentum? Well, I will circle back to something Patrick said, which is I do need to know where the scene is going. I need to know where it is all headed, of course, like generally where this book is going, but even at the scene level, I need to know who's after what. And maybe it's not going to be great. Maybe I can go back in and find ways to heighten the tension in the scene, but I do need to know those bits. You need to find your little sparkly bit, your cookie that you're headed towards, and do that. So if you are finding that maybe this is a different question actually, Cass. You're sort of like, are we getting tired of our book? Is that what losing momentum is, or just?
You're kind of like when you're just feeling stuck with it. You're like, I don't know where I'm going. I've lost the thread, or I want to keep the momentum up because I just need to get through this part, but I'm just sludging through.
I think I write, or at least I'm motivated very similarly to Kate, possibly, depending on if I understand what you said. But for me, writing is a series of, because again, I write fantasy with sword fights and stuff. It's a series of awesome set pieces and amazing, heartbreaking or laugh out loud character moments separated by whatever junk I have to do to get the characters to that scene. So not to fall back on my old answer, but if I can't make that part great, I just get there as quickly as possible and go like, okay, I'm not having fun on this part. This part isn't revealing any great character traits. It kind of feels like it's recycling. Okay, good. How fast can I get them to the discotheque? How fast can I get them to the fight scene or the kiss under the moonlight, the interrupted kiss that then has ninjas and, whatever else I introduced in there. But for me, those beautiful, sparkly moments that I've been thinking about is like part of the reason I'm writing this. I'm like, yes, I'm going to make somebody sad here. And that's awesome. And I love that. And here people are going to go, oh, this character deserves to be hugged and protected. And I want them angry that anything in the world that is bad has ever happened to them. And like, those are the moments I'm holding on to. And I focus on those. I am really good at holding those moments in my head and then using those as the cookie I will eventually get if I eat the vegetables of my setup scenes.
Well, you bring up a good point, which is the, sometimes I hear from people like, oh, I have to write this one scene where the characters are, traveling from X to Y or whatever. And I'm like, no, you don't. You don't have to write that. You're a magician. You can jump us through time. You can send us back into, like, you can do anything you want with your novel. But please don't feel you have to write a particular scene. Like, if it is not exciting you, I guarantee you it's not exciting your audience. Now, I know in National Novel Writing Month, it's a little bit of a different thing because it's just a sort of one word after the other. So you might end up with those moments, and because you write your 1,667 words. Is that it, Cass? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think also having an idea in mind, for me, like, the midpoint is pretty important. So writing towards that and having that in my head, knowing that there's going to be this really bad pit of despair at some point, and then these like those moments can help you, like, I think can help you keep your momentum up. And maybe there's also just some practical things like go for a walk or something. I don't know, Nikki, do you have any?
Honestly, when I get stuck really badly, first of all, I'm really stubborn. So I'll just think it to pieces. I will think about it in the shower when I'm driving. I'll drive past where I'm supposed to be going because I was thinking. Often for me, if I go take a nap, which is just mostly I lay down and close my eyes sometimes, and just as you relax, it's like your brain's like, I've got it. It's like you're not pushing so hard. You're sitting in front of the computer and you're all sphinctered up trying to make it come out, and it won't. Then you just go relax, and there it is.
I also have, because Nikki, this made me think of the other thing that I do, the two tricks I do. One is my little brain hack, which is even if I'm not obsessively hyper focusing on the next thing I'm going to write, I will sometimes go, okay, I had a really good writing night. Awesome, cool. They're almost to the discotheque. And then I will, as I go to, as I'm getting ready for bed, I'll go, I should figure out how this guy, how the crime lord at the discotheque is going to talk the heroes into carrying out this job, because I still haven't figured that part out. And I won't, on my better nights, try to solve it right there and then with my waking brain. I will go, okay, I'm going to back burner that thought, but just so you know, back of my mind, please consider that in your spare cycles. And then I will just try to go to sleep, and I will try to get through the next day, the next work day, and do stuff okay. And a lot of times just prepping my brain by thinking about it the night before actually means that when the time comes, it gets there a lot faster. Yeah. It just goes, hey, but your back brain actually did have a couple of ideas since you put it in there. Yeah. The other thing I do, and I apologize, Cassandra, if this is jumping on one of the other questions, when I am in novel mode, sometimes I do have rituals. I have a writing soundtrack usually for whatever novel I'm doing, and I have an easier time getting past the blank page when I go, okay, I'm going to put my music on. It's going to be the right music for this novel. It's the music I listened to while writing this book. And I even, my partner's family is First Nations, and they gave me these little cedar bags, and I love how they smell. And so sometimes it's the cedar bag, but I will actually smell that, or I will light a scented candle. And the scented candle becomes my little sensory life hack that says, hey, brain, when you smell this vanilla citrus blend, it is time for your brain to go into novel mode. And it's silly, but like all silly things, you do enough of it and it's enough to just convince you. Sometimes it's Dumbo's magic feather. It's like, I don't actually need the scented candle to write, but having it as part of the ritual that gets me into the right mental framework to do it without second guessing myself.
No, yeah, I think that's not silly at all. And I think, in the case of NaNo, when you are expected to sort of sit and write, it might be quite important actually to have a ritual built around it so that you are cueing your brain that this is what we're doing now, and we're not thinking about the laundry and, all of those things. And And sensory is one of those ways to cue your brain. Of course, it's not just necessarily, you know, sitting or in front of a computer. It's like you've got your candle, or you have your light, or you have your music, or whatever it is, whatever works for you. I think it's a really good idea, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of psychology to back that one up too. So I just saw a question come in, just kind of on a topic we were just talking about. So when you do get stuck, do you ever find it useful to skip where you're stuck, what you're stuck on, and go back to it?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. This is partially why I use Scrivener, because you can write all over the place. You can write the scene that's inspiring you. You can skip that one and you don't, you know, lose your place, or you can rearrange it and put it back where it goes later. And I know we talked a little bit about research, but sometimes research is what unsticks me too, right? So, you know, if I have set my novel in a particular place, sometimes just doing a bit more research on that place, or a bit more research on the concept that I'm working with, will unlock ideas for scenes. Is that the question? Is that the end of, am I answering that question? I'm like losing the thread here. It's all of it.
Mostly skipping what you're stuck on and then going back later to it.
Yeah.
It's both. It's a love-hate thing, because I can absolutely. I don't have Scrivener, but I will do, you know, asterisk, 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 asterisk. Future Patrick, figure out exact motivation for crime lord here. Boop. Love past Patrick, and then I get to that in the next draft and go, oh, great. 90% of the time, 10% of the time, it's a hilarious, you know, screwing future me. But 90% of the time, I actually get there and go, great. That's actually not even a problem anymore. I can go, now that I have a draft, of course I can go in and fix that. Of course I can go in and do the tweaks that are necessary, you know, to solve that. Much smarter tweaks than I would have made had I insisted on trying to solve it right there in the moment. So I absolutely skip, again, when it's a question of if it's something I know I can safely get past without endangering the entire fabric of the novel.
I do red ink. I change the text color to red, and I'm like, put something here that's exciting. They and then I move on.
Make this better.
Yeah, make this better.
Oh,
I've definitely had notes like that myself.
Yeah. What were you thinking? Sometimes I ask myself.
When I do a lot of my like edits, I write on paper, and a lot of the times I just write awkward. Then I have to go back and make it less awkward. I'm like, that's not helpful, but that's what I.
Yeah.
Awesome. How do you silence your inner critic when you're trying to get that first draft out and you're going, no one's gonna want to read this?
That one, I don't know. That one is just perseverance, boneheaded perseverance for me. It's there all the time, and I just keep telling the story anyway, because I'm compelled to tell the story. It's definitely easier to write when you're in that moment of belief than when you're in that pit of despair. I suck. Everything I do sucks. There's no point to it. I don't know. All I can say is I just keep going. It's always there. It's never silent.
I'm not really good at silencing the inner critic. So my solution more often is to drown out the inner critic. I am not good at most sports, but my dad plays golf really, really surprisingly well. And would have this system where the way to become better at putting, which is like the little, you know, the short one to get when you're near the hole. Segue for people who didn't know golf was he says, like, this starter thing you do is he makes a bunch. He starts out by doing all of these tiny little, like, 6-inch putts, and they're gimmies. There's almost no way you could miss them. But by the time he's done a dozen of them, even though they were easy, even though they were simple, he can say, okay, you just made a dozen putts. You just got it in the hole 12 out of 12 times. You just did that. And that kind of psyching is how you psych yourself up. So sometimes for me, the writer version of that is I need to get some easy wins, because if I can get some easy wins for myself as a person, that's going to psych me up enough that I will never drown out the critic entirely, or I'll never silence the critic, but I can drown them out by getting a bunch of mental cheerleaders in my head to say, this novel is going to kick butt. This is cool. Here's the thing you're writing for. You're going to make people laugh. You're going to make people cry. Sometimes it's just writing that cool line. Sometimes it's a visualization exercise. Okay, yes, I'm going to take 5 indulgent minutes and think about that scene I'm getting to in the future and how amazing that's going to be, because I know that one's going to be great and I believe in that one. That's one of the reasons I'm writing this book. And that gets my inner cheerleaders to shut up my inner critic. Because I don't think I'm ever going to be able to make the inner critic stop talking. And I think trying that you end up just kind of muffling your whole brain. Or maybe people whose brains work differently, it works great for them. But I'm much better at countering it by psyching myself up.
I think that's sort of the beauty of NaNo, though, and finding community also, right? Is knowing that there are people around you that are doing the thing and they're excited for you to do the thing, and maybe that helps silence the critic. I had an evil thought, which is you could, I've never done this, but you could either go search for it or remember the book that you read that you thought was terrible and that was published, you know, and you were like, this was boring and the word choice is just trite and the characters are terrible, they're one-dimensional, whatever, and then write the name of it on a sticky note and then just stick it in a corner of your laptop and remember that somebody published that.
The healing power of spite. That's beautiful and sacred, and I love it.
I do know more than one person who has said that much of their career has been fueled by spite. So
I think I may have been that person, because
you definitely work with some of them for sure. I know that much.
Of course, this is all subjective, but that also is the point, right? Is that it is all subjective, and so every one of us thinks that we're not doing right, like we're not doing it quite well enough, but there is an audience out there for your work, and so because there was an audience out there for that book that you hated.
I did have one other answer that I realized after I blabbed a bunch.
Is it kinder than mine, Patrick?
No, it's still pretty spiteful. But one thing that I have found is in a lot of cases, my inner critic is not telling, like the cheerleaders approach, the psyching yourself up approach is great when the inner critic is saying you suck just in general, because you can't negotiate with you suck in general. There's no middle ground on that one. But what my inner critic will also do sometimes is go, I don't think this characterization makes sense. And the inner critic is still not helpful, but they're also not wrong, because it's your first draft. And you can have an extended argument going, inner critic, do you think I don't know this? It's my first draft, shut up. But that hasn't contributed to your daily word count. So what I have stumbled into after my career in game development is I come up with a bug list for myself. I will go, okay, it is apparently stressing the back of my brain out to know that currently my main character's motivations are murky. And somehow my inner critic thinks I'm going to forget this and not fix it unless I dwell on it. So what I open another doc that calls things to fix in next draft, and I write that down. This character, figure out motivations, they're kind of murky right now. And not all the time, but a lot of times, that gets my inner critic to shut up. The inner critic goes, great, I just wanted to make sure you had it covered. And once my inner critic knows it's on a list somewhere that I have to go look at, once I'm done with the draft, it'll go, okay, I was just checking. Okay, carry on.
Oh, Patrick, that resonates so hard with me. It's like perseverate on it. It's like, I'm going to remember. It's still going to be the wrong thing when I go to look at it the 20th time, I don't need to think about it all day and night. Come on, man, just stop.
I recently heard from, I know she's actually in this room, so a brilliant local author, that the draft, she was saying that, like, I don't know, she's like, draft 0 doesn't even exist until you know what the story is. And she's like, you might write several drafts and they're all just you telling the story to yourself. And once you know the story and you've got it figured out, that's your draft 0. And so I'm like, oh, I might try to tell my inner critic that this time around.
I know I used to get this idea that, oh, somehow I'd get very good at writing, and then I would be able to really just 1 or 2 drafts and that would be it. And I'd just be that good. It's like, no, I don't even think that way anymore. Now I'm like, I just have to write a lot of drafts. It doesn't matter. There's words. I can take some out. I can put some in. I can move stuff around. I can throw out half the manuscript because it just went the wrong direction. It doesn't matter. You just keep going and finally you get somewhere. And it's, I think when you come in with these weird upfront limits on yourself, it just makes it even harder than it needs to be. You know, it's, I did an MFA in creative writing, and one of the things that it was Annabelle Lyons said at the very first class I had was that if you write 500 words a day, at the end of the year, you have a novel. And I was like, oh my God, because until then, I couldn't even conceive of writing a novel-length manuscript. I was a short story writer, I was a poet. So to write something long like that was just, it was impossible. How could I? But then you say, oh, 500 words. That actually isn't that hard for me to do. And you do that every day, most days of the week, and you'll have a novel at the end of the year. You've done a thing.
There's a book called, I think it's The Art of Writing Slow, that talks about the 500 words a day too. And I read it forever ago and I don't remember anything about it except that that's the 500 words a day. I am aware that we have about 20 minutes left, so I am going to say if anybody has questions, feel free to throw it into the chat. I do have more questions I could ask you folks, but there was one earlier. Oh, I'm sorry if I mess up your name. Savithri, hopefully you're still here, asked, what do you think about using an AI as an assistant to do research, to get suggestions about characterizations, plot, structure, etc.? We would obviously do the actual writing ourselves, and they attended a meeting earlier today about using AI assistants for screenwriting, and it sounded interesting and useful. So any thoughts on AI?
No, Nikki, you want to get it first. It's
I
all
was
you.
going to say,
Good luck.
yeah, good luck. I'm diving into the deep, murky water. I think, I mean, I've used ChatGPT to see what it does, to ask it questions. I noticed a very interesting thing recently. I revised a novel I wrote in 2016, and in it, the character is a boy, and he has to solve a Beale cipher. And in order to do that, you have to have the novel that created the cipher in the first place. And so I had done the whole cipher and pulled it up. And now when I put in the coordinates that the cipher led to, Google would not tell me where it was. And I was like, that's so weird, because I found it on Google. Like, that's how I figured it out in the first place. But then when I asked ChatGPT, it told me. So I'm not sure what is going on there. That seems really weird to me. I find it an interesting starting point sometimes. If you are stuck, ask it a question. Hey, what would happen if this or that? But I also think at this point, there's a lot of questions about copyright and how much of your material you take from AI, then does your work become public domain automatically because you've taken too much stuff from basically other people's stuff that was stolen without their permission. Kate's, for instance, was used to train AI. A number of my friends' books were just used to train AI. They haven't been compensated for that. They didn't give permission. And so until there are definitive rules about what happens when you start using too much AI to create a story, I'm going to be really careful.
Yeah, I put myself in pretty much the same boat as Nikki. In addition to the possible ethical issues, what I've found is even using it for brainstorming, because again, in most cases, it's not AI. It's a language learning model. It's a fancy random number generator, except all the numbers are other people's stuff that's been taken from other people. And I actually, I have done writing brainstorming exercises on, story generation, random number stuff. Hey, roll on this table, enemy from the past surfaces. Okay, cool. I can work with that. What I've found is the more flavorful or the more inherently possessing of its own style the random number or the random generation is. Sorry, I apparently have fruit flies. It's really, really helping me talk. The more of a style it has, the more that style influences what I write, and I don't like that. I like my own weird style of awkward sincerity and not quite enough setting. So I tend to I would say I avoid it. In addition to the ethical and the copyright issues, I would just avoid it because it feels too close to the times when I have talked about a story I'm brainstorming with a friend and that I haven't written yet. And I'm kind of thinking about this. And my friend has not just been supportive and gone like, that's cool, but actually jumped in and go, and what you should do is writing my story at me. So that's beyond the ethical stuff. That's the consideration that I would put out there for it.
I'm also going to throw ML Jeff under the bus because he also he's a computer science person, so he knows a lot about it. But as far as I'm also aware, ChatGPT does not actually know anything. So if you're using it for research, I would definitely make sure you're verifying that in other areas, because ChatGPT will lie to you because it's predictive text. So that's I would just caution if you're using it for research, similar to using Wikipedia. Wikipedia is great. Maybe just double check on another source. I say though I use Wikipedia a ton too. I don't know how many of you necessarily do NaNoWriMo, but Tima asked, do you actually write every day during November? I can say I definitely try to. I made the mistake of getting into For the Words, which is a just little plug, and it's a gamification of writing, and there's a streak. I love streaks. I can't break up streaks. So if that's your jam, that's why I also like NaNoWriMo, because it's just like you get badges for writing every day. But I might just make that a little Duolingo Owl is real business, and I feel very bad if I have to use a streak freeze because that is a limited resource. But I'm just going to maybe expand that question a little bit to you. How often do you try to write, or kind of what do your writing sessions look like? I'm going to throw Kate under the bus because you look pensive about that question.
Okay.
That question actually, because lately it's not been much writing at all, but it's just busy at EPL. I would say in relation to NaNo, I think it's important to try to write every day, mostly because if you get into the mentality of like, well, it's just 1,600 words and I can make it up tomorrow, and then you do that another day, and then okay, so you're like, I had 3,000 words out today, and then so you do tend to fall behind. So if your goal is to finish NaNo, then it's a good practice, I think, to just give yourself permission to commit to it, right? Just give yourself permission to be in front of your laptop or however you're writing for a period of time every day, and try to hit that word count. That would be my advice. And then I'm going to avoid the question of do you write every day?
Yeah, I think during NaNo and during normal writing time are two very different things for me. During NaNo, I would say yes, with occasional, yeah, if you get ahead enough, then you can afford an oh no, something has gone wrong day, and not beat yourself up about it. But otherwise, no, not feeling the vibe is not a great reason to not do it if you want to complete NaNo. For when I'm just in general novel writing mode, what I often end up doing, just because of how my life is currently structured, is I only actually get to write a few days a week. And I kind of end up just trying to make the most of that. So I will think about it as hard as possible, or put it on the back burner of my brain, so that when that time comes, I am ready and eager to write. And so again, in not NaNo times, just going like, okay, great, I'm going to do a chapter a week. That's what I can do. And those chapters are pretty good size. The chapters are, 5,000 words or thereabout. So I'm not at NaNo speed, but I'm writing, a fairly good sized chunk of it. But it's really more of percolate, boom, and a bunch of words, because that's honestly what works for me when I'm doing normal novel writing. Doesn't work for everyone though, and you have to figure out what works best for you.
I've actually never done NaNo, but I have done the ghost writing with the tight deadlines. And when I'm on a project of my own, I just write. It's torture for me not to be writing. My husband has been training for Ironman, and he feels very guilty because it takes a lot of time. And I'm like, no, it's okay, honey. Shoo, go ride your bike for 6 hours. I'm going to write all weekend anyway. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, and I kind of think like during NaNo, if you're having trouble writing every day, just treat yourself to the candy, right? Just have the candy moments. Don't worry about the interstitials. Just go for the candy.
Yeah, chocolate rewards.
Yeah, literally and figuratively candy. Remember, November 1st is cheap Halloween candy, so that often fuels a lot of NaNoWriMo. I just noticed a couple of questions. So Stephanie asked what write-ins are. So write-ins are kind of communal times where everybody gets together and we all type. Writing is often a solitary activity, but not during November. We all get together, so we do sprints. So we'll set timers. I like to do 2 to 5 minutes. People don't like to do 2 to 5 minutes. So we normally do 10, 15 minutes of concentrated writing time. And it's kind of a nice way of just writing with people and creating that creative environment. I believe we have one in-person write-in that we will be stealing Kate for, and she will be joining us. So that will be very exciting. I believe on November 20th, so we'll be at the Milner. But our event schedule, I will send out in the next NaNo mail. So did you want to say anything about that, Kate?
Well, I was going to say, yes, I'm going to definitely join you on the 20th. And I think Milner might host a couple more. I know you're hosting some in-person write-ins, and I think Milner, we might do also on the 6th and whatever the Monday is after the 20th, 27th, probably.
I guess, yeah, basic math is the 27th. Yeah, so please, we'll have events listed, and I will be sending out regular NaNo mails with all of our events coming up, and you can register and stuff like that. We'll have any information. And Sylvia3 asked, do you have to do a novel? No, you can't. The challenge used to be towards a fiction novel, and then anybody who didn't, we just called you rebels. It used to be, people who were using old novels, they were rewriting novels, they're doing nonfiction. But yeah, it's basically at this point, the biggest thing is to give yourself permission to focus on writing and to make writing a priority during the month of November. Because there is honestly every reason not to write. And there is really just one reason to write, and it's because you want to. And so it's just giving yourself permission to work on whatever that project is, and to do it as part of a community. So yeah. I will ask, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Hopefully I've not missed any, but my last question for you folks, So NaNoWriMo, 50,000 words, 30 days. It's a deadline. Do you have any advice for writers, things they can take away? One last piece that you would like them to know that will help them all on their journeys through the wildness it is November?
Piece of advice. Oh my gosh. You can fix it later. That's my advice. You can fix it later. Just
Fix it in post.
Yes, it's when it's going to get fixed anyway. Even if you think you wrote the most amazing opus the first time around, you'll fix it later anyway. I think that is my advice. But also, Cass, I would echo what you just said, which is no one will care about your writing as much as you do, and you should care about it. You should give yourself permission and prioritize it. And November is an excuse to do that. It's just an excuse to go like, I'm not on dinners this week because I'm writing, or, you know, that is definitely how I approached it when I did my first NaNo, and that is my first published novel. It was like, it was just a moment in time that I was giving myself. And as Cass mentioned, there are so many ways you can convince yourself that you shouldn't write, or you don't have the time, or it's not important. And it is important. And so, yes, you can fix it later, and please join us.
In my house, I say books don't write themselves.
Was there a last books don't write themselves? Sorry, was that?
Just, you know, they don't write themselves. So you got to sit down and do it. Worth it. Yeah.
Honestly, Kate stole mine. So I'm sorry, was inspired by in advance mine. So the one thing I would toss out is a piece of advice from young me making mistakes. I was in a writing group and I had written a couple of things that had gotten published, and enjoyed the writing group. The writing group was a bunch of thoughtful fellow, you know, former English majors, Bay Area, California tech nerds, and, you know, and they really pushed me and got me writing different stuff and more thoughtful stuff. And one day I was working on something. It was this kind of literary with an edge kind of piece, and it was kind of dark, and the protagonist was kind of a terrible person, but in an interesting and thoughtful way. And it had gotten, you know, it had gotten really thoughtful notes at the workshop from people, you know, said, oh, we can see what you're doing, it's really interesting. And what had struck me eventually was I get home from work. At the time I had one child, I now have two. And not children actually anymore, teenagers. And I get home from work, I get them fed, I feed the cats, I pay the bills, or, you know, do whatever necessary adulting I have to do. And on a good night, I have maybe 90 minutes before I have to go to sleep. And what I realized at that time, as I hit that short story with the unlikable but interesting protagonist, was that I was writing something I would not want to spend my free time reading. There are people who would love writing that kind of character, but it wasn't me. I was writing to try to impress my writing group, and that was not going to lead me to success, and that was not going to make me happy to have written. It was interesting, it was a good intellectual exercise, but I wasn't writing something that I would have read for pleasure in my free time. And so all other things being equal, and this is, you know, most useful in the as you think about it beforehand phase, but write something that you would be excited to read. Write something that you would stay up too late to finish because you had to know how the next section went or the next chapter. Write something that is the kind of thing that you would say, yes, I want a t-shirt of this because I like it enough that I want to go to a convention and have other people know that I'm one of the fellow fans like them. Write something you're passionate about, even if it's embarrassing or you feel like it's not as deep or thoughtful as the thing you feel you should be working on. because that's what you're going to be able to work on for 30 days and maybe get 50,000 words out of.
Awesome. I think it's a great point to leave on. I do want to say thank you so much to Kate, Patrick, and Nikki. We really appreciate you coming out to this. This has been a, I don't know, at least I think it was a great kickoff to our NaNoWriMo season. I also want to say thank you so much to Kate Gibson with the Edmonton Public Library and the Edmonton Public Library and Capital City Press as a whole. They are wonderfully supportive of our events, and we will be hosting our kickoff party on October 28th. So if you haven't snuck onto the forums and seen our, actually, I don't even know if we have all of these details. But yeah, so keep an eye open on our events, and we will hopefully see you all for our kickoff party. If you aren't part of NaNoWriMo, you can join at, I believe it's nanowrimo.org, and you can look up the Edmonton region. We have a Discord, we have events, we have weekly mailouts that I don't know, maybe they're funny. I try to be funny. Nobody gives me feedback. I make myself laugh, so hopefully somebody else does. But yes, so thank you all so much for coming out and for spending your Thursday evening with us. And I will just give a quiet little applause for our panelists. So thank you.
So much.
Thank you all for coming.
Joining us. Thank you.
And thank you for Cassandra for running this and moderating. And thank you, Kate, for making it happen.
Just my pleasure.
Both Kates, all the Kates.
Both Kates. Thank you, both Kates, for making this happen.
Thank you so much.
Kate squared.
And thank you, everyone. I will send out the link once we have the YouTube video up, as well as the things I put in chat, some of the books that were mentioned, and also the details on the write-ins happening at EPL. Thank you, everyone.